You know, a police officer's badge, it symbolizes this incredible amount of trust we place in someone. We give them the power to investigate, to interrogate, and to enforce the law. But what happens when that trust is completely shattered? Well, today we're going to look at 4 cases where law enforcement officers, the very people trained to get the truth, found themselves on the other side of the interrogation table. This is the big question, right? Think about it. What happens when someone who knows every trick in the book, every psychological tactic, suddenly has that entire playbook used against them? It's a wild reversal of roles, and it tells you a lot about how the system works. So let's start with our first case. Meet Tyler Moody, a correctional officer. He gets called into a room, and in his mind, he's probably thinking he's just in for a slap on the wrist. Maybe he'll lose his job. He had no idea what was really coming. So what did he actually do? Well, an inmate, a guy charged with murder, was caught with a cell phone and a charger, and the investigation pointed right back to Moody. He was accused of smuggling in contraband. And look, that's not just breaking the rules, that's a third-degree felony. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Moody crumbled almost instantly. As soon as his boss said, "You can't keep your job," he just folded. He admitted to everything. He probably thought, okay, I'm fired, that's the worst of it. He was completely clueless that this wasn't some HR meeting, it was a criminal investigation, and he was about to be charged for betraying the very system he worked for. And the result? A 1-year prison sentence. Now get this, in a crazy twist of fate, Tyler Moody is now serving that sentence in the exact same correctional facility where he used to be a guard. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. From officer to inmate, all under the same roof. Okay, so we're going from a pretty simple confession to a case that is way, way more complicated. This one involves a decorated LAPD detective, a murder that had been a cold case since the 80s, and one tiny piece of evidence that brought the whole thing crashing down decades later. So, picture this. It's 1986. Sherry Rasmussen is murdered. The police think it was a burglary that went horribly wrong, and for 23 years, the case just sits there collecting dust. But then, in 2009, investigators take another look. They find DNA, and it doesn't point to some random burglar. Nope, it points to one of their own, Detective Stephanie Lazarus. Turns out she was in a love triangle with the victim and the victim's husband. Now, the investigators knew they couldn't just come at her head on. She's a seasoned detective. She knows all the moves. So they got clever. They brought her in pretending they needed her help on an art theft case. And they said, hey, let's use an interrogation room, for privacy. It was a brilliant tactic to get her guard down before they dropped the bomb. The second they mentioned the names of her ex-boyfriend and his murdered wife, her entire professional mask just shattered. You could see it all. The classic tells, her breathing got faster, her movements got all jerky and erratic, and her language just became super defensive. She knew the interrogation game inside and out. But this time, she was the one being played. And here's the kicker. Thinking she could outsmart them, Lazarus actually volunteered to give a DNA sample. She probably figured, hey, I'll cooperate and that will make me look innocent. Well, it did the exact opposite. Her DNA was a perfect match to the sample from the crime scene way back in 1986, and for that, she got 27 years to life. All right, our third case takes us smack into the digital age. This time it's Officer Jaylen Fleer, who was a suspect in a truly awful crime involving child exploitation. And the key to cracking his case wasn't a confession or some old DNA. It was a username that looked totally random. The strategy here was all about making him comfortable. The lead detective came in with this really friendly, almost bubbly personality. She told him he could take off his heavy-duty belt, just relax, have a chat. It was a textbook move to disarm him before they hit him with the damning digital evidence they'd been digging up. This part is just brilliant detective work. They took this username, J178211, which looks like gibberish, and they just dismantled it. J was for Jaylen, 17 was his college baseball jersey number, 82 was his high school number, and 11 was his graduation year. It wasn't random at all. It was basically his entire life story in a username, a digital fingerprint. And this was the moment. The exact moment the friendly chat became a full-blown interrogation. The detective brings up the username, the Snapchat messages, and you can just see Fleer's whole calm demeanor completely vanish. You can practically hear the panic in his voice with that one question. He knew they had him. So Fleer lawyered up, but it was too late. The police already had a search warrant. They took his phone, they took his car, they took his DNA, and they just built this mountain of evidence against him.
In the end, he was charged with 20 felonies and sentenced to 12 years in prison.
Now, our final case. It's the most disturbing one. This is about an Oklahoma City officer named Daniel Holtzclaw, who was a serial predator. He used his badge, his uniform, his authority to commit absolutely horrific crimes against women in his own community. It all started with a single report from an unlawful traffic stop. When investigators questioned Holtzclaw, his story raised red flags immediately. He said he made the stop off the grid. For any cop listening, that's just a ridiculous excuse. Standard procedure is you have to report every stop to dispatch. It was his first lie, and it wouldn't be his last.
From that one stop, the whole case just exploded. His story was full of these long, awkward pauses. His own girlfriend's story didn't match his alibi. And then the floodgates opened. 12 other women came forward with similar, terrifying stories. But the final nail in the coffin was the physical evidence. A pubic hair found in his patrol car that was a perfect DNA match to one of his victims.
The jury found Daniel Holtzclaw guilty on 18 of 36 charges. And for his disgusting abuse of power, he was sentenced to 263 years in prison. No chance of parole.
So, we've just walked through 4 totally different cases, right? A quick confession, a cold case that was decades old, a digital trail, and a serial predator. But underneath it all, they all share one powerful common thread. You can see it all laid out here pretty clearly. Whether it was Moody's simple confession, Lazarus's DNA, Fleer's digital footprint, or the mountain of testimony and DNA against Holtzclaw, each and every one of them was brought down by the very same investigative tools they were trained to use on others. Each path led to the same destination, a conviction.
And I think that's the real takeaway here. The justice system, when it's working right, doesn't care what your job is. A badge can't hide you from DNA evidence. Knowing interrogation tactics can't erase your digital history. The message is simple. Undeniable evidence is more powerful than any uniform. Look, these cases are deeply unsettling, for sure. But they also show something else. The system turning on itself to root out the truth. And it leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. Can the system truly hold itself accountable? Well, these 4 stories suggest that when a case is built on facts, the evidence will always win.